Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first Children and Young People's Families Cabinet panel of this new administration and of this municipal year. I'm County Councillor Teresa Heritage. I'm Executive Member for Children, Young People and Families at County Hall. Got an announcement to make before we start, as we usually do. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of the Council are asked to keep their microphones switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones off once they have finished speaking. Cameras may be left on throughout the meeting if members wish, but you don't have to. If you experience a connection or other technical issue, it may help to switch off your camera. Cameras should be switched on if and when speaking in the meeting. To indicate a wish to speak, members should use the raised hand function. Use of the meeting chat function is exclusively for voting, if I could remind members about that, because members of public can see what we're putting in chat. At the end of the debate on each item of business, there will be a vote. Members should vote using the meeting chat function by indicating for, against, or abstain, and I would declare the result after each vote. Breaks of at least 15 minutes will be held every 2 hours and will be taken after a speaker in the debate has finished speaking. If we are voting, the vote will be concluded before the break is taken. Other breaks will be incorporated as appropriate. So, today we haven't any membership changes, nor have we any apologies, which is great. And as this is the first meeting, I'd like to ask members just to introduce themselves. There's some familiar faces and there's some new faces. So let's start with Nigel Bell.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor Nigel Bell, a councillor for West Watford. I'm the Labour spokesman on Children's Services, and I've been on this committee, I think in its various forms, for the last 12 years. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Helen Campbell.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello, everybody. Helen Campbell, representing St Albans North. Delighted to be here.
Okay, thank you. Leslie Greensmith.
Hi, I'm Leslie Greensmith. I represent Govstoke and Berry Green Division, and I sat on this panel during the last term.
Thank you. Dee Hart.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dee Hart and I represent the Waltham Cross Division in the Borough of Broxbourne, and I've sat on this panel for a number of years. Thank you.
Thanks. Pauline Hiscock.
Thank you.
Paula, sorry, not Pauline.
Yeah, that's all right. Yes, I'm Paula Hiscox and I represent Rickmansworth West, and I am new to this panel.
Thank you. Graham Lawrence.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Graham Lawrence, and I represent Old Stevenage, and not only new to this panel, but new to the County Council, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Mark Mills-Bishop. You're on mute, Mark.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Mills-Bishop, County Councillor for Framstead End and Turnford. I've not been on this panel before, but I am now the Vice Chairman of this panel. Thank you.
Anthony Rowlands.
Anthony Rowlands, St Albans East, hitherto a member of the panel.
Thank you. Fiona Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm newly elected County Councillor for Hanside and Pear Tree Division in Welland Hatfield.
Okay, Fiona, you're very quiet, so you might need to turn up your volume at some stage. Mark Watkin, thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm the other Mark, which gets very confusing sometimes in these meetings. I am the opposition spokesperson for Children's Services and have been a member of this panel for a significant number of years, but not as long as Nigel. Thank you.
Thank you. So now moving on in the agenda, we have members' interests, and that's I haven't had any interest declared to me, but just to remind members that if you do have an interest, please declare them at that item of the meeting. So moving on to the agenda, the first item on the agenda is the membership and remit of the panel. The members have already introduced themselves, so I'm hoping that that will be suffice for minuting purposes. I will just go on and read the remit of this panel. So the remit is as follows. It covers children's services, including education for the purposes of the Children Act 2004, children's social care, corporate parenting, children looked after, the virtual school, children's residential care, fostering and adoption, children's safeguarding, including SASH, 0 to 25 together, special educational needs, including ISL, EHCPs and SEND provision in schools and special schools, early intervention and families first, early years, children's centres or family centres and childcare. And then we have youth services, youth offending and youth justice. So it's a very broad panel and there's lots for everybody to learn, I should say, and help with. So could I ask members now to vote in the chat function to note this this information, membership and the remit, please. Excellent. I think we're there.
I'm struggling here. Where do I find the button to vote?
Okay, so on the top bar, you've got a little speech button.
Oh, yes.
Okay, click on that. That will open the chat function.
Indeed.
And you can write noted in where it says reply.
Right, okay.
Okay. Sorry, I should have explained where it was. Sorry, thank you. Are we all there?
Yes, Trees, all noted.
Good. So that's the first difficult part. All right. So you've all found the chat function and learnt how to vote. So that's really good. Thank you. You'll need that one a lot going forward. So we now move on, and the first item to look at are the minutes of item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting. These have been circulated, and I'm looking for colleagues to, they're quite old now, colleagues to approve these minutes. Do I have any questions?
Teresa, could I ask a question? Sorry, I tried to put
Anthony.
Anthony,
I can't see your hand. That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, I'll voice it. It's not so challenging. I'm trying to be helpful. We had a lengthy discussion, a very helpful discussion about the impact of the pandemic on young people's mental health and well-being. A couple of points from the minutes. One is, I think we were promised, and I may well have missed it. It may have been down to electoral diversion, but I think we were promised the circulation of some documents about how people could source information and advice, and I guess that might be very useful. I'd certainly like it again, and I guess other members of the panel might find that helpful. It's the 5.3 action. Just whether maybe that could be repeated or even updated, because that is the sort of thing where members do get residents approaching them on behalf of their children often. And the second one is, do you know when under 5.7 we said we were going to revisit after 6 months. Is that scheduled for late summer, early autumn? Thanks, Teresa.
Okay, Jenny, do you want to come back? Well, at least I'm pretty sure that the information was circulated, but that can go out again.
It can, absolutely. Yes, Teresa, and it'll probably be slightly updated. And in terms of the forward plan, we'll make sure that that's on there. I would think probably in the November panel's probably going to be more useful, because then schools will have gone back as well. But there is a lot of work going on. I can absolutely assure you.
Yeah, we do have lots of stats, but as I said, schools are going to be breaking up again soon. So hopefully we're on an even straight keel and we're all out of COVID by September. So and then we'll know what we're having to deal with. So you'll see some of this information come through in the quarterly performance, Anthony. So okay. Are there any more questions? Okay, could I ask you, please, those that were there? Oh, have I got another hand gone up?
It was just to say,
Oh,
obviously, if we weren't there, we won't vote. No,
obviously. So, colleagues, if you were there, please could I ask you to vote? Okay, lovely. Yep. So those are approved. Thanks very much. Item 3 on the agenda is public petitions. There were none. So we move on to item 4. And this item 4 is the Q4 performance report. And could I ask officers to introduce themselves today before they start to speak? And the first officer is Paul Dryden. Paul, can you tell us a bit about yourself, what you do, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So my name's Paul Dryden. I'm the Senior Performance and Development Manager in Children's Services. I've been at council for 8 years now, and I lead across the whole of Children's Services, looking at all the performance data, looking at things like how we compare nationally, trends, and sort of looking at how we can sort of make improvements where performance isn't as good as it needs to be. I'm also chair of the Eastern Region Performance Group, so we can also sort of do benchmarking across the region and compare ourselves that way. I'm just going to share my screen. I've got a short presentation. So hopefully everyone can see that. Just 1 second, actually.
Could you enlarge the screen, Paul? It's
I'm just trying. Yeah. It's got a bit funny. I'm just trying to get it to go on the right screen. That's it. Does that help?
Not yet, but give it. That's it. It's there now.
Perfect.
Great.
Excellent. So hi everyone. So I'm going to be going through the Q4 performance. We work on financial years, so Q4 is January through March. But also because it's the end of the financial year, I'll sort of add in also some sort of extra contextual information around the end of year performance. I'll go through the whole presentation if that's okay with the chair, and we'll do questions after. And this is just a highlight presentation, so there may be other things in the report that you want to discuss, and that's perfectly fine at the end of the presentation if there's anything in particular you've picked up from the report. So first, looking at Families First, which is our early help services, and also our specialist adolescent support services as well, which work with teenagers. So we're looking at assessments completed in Families First and assessments completed within our SASH team, and the total across the two different services, the total number of children that were supported is 668, and that's down a bit on the previous quarter, where it was 685. And just to give a bit of context about an assessment in Families First, so it's not like you go in and do an assessment and it's over in a short amount of time. The assessment is kept open all the time that they're working with the family. So some of these might be open sort of 6 months or a bit longer, depending on how much help that the family needs. As I'm going through, I'll sort of give a bit of extra context about how the pandemic has affected things, because actually a lot of our numbers are quite different to how they normally are because of the impact of what's happened over the last 12 months. And what we found in Families First, and well, actually it's a bit of a repeated theme that you'll see sort of throughout the presentation, is at that sort of beginning time, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the first lockdown happened, activity slowed down considerably. A lot of referrals that come into children's services, whether it's Families First or social services, tend to come via schools, but also sort of third sector organisations that might not necessarily have been fully open. So what we saw is a drop in the activity at the beginning of the year, and then as schools started to open up and things opened up more, that started to increase. So while overall the picture is a slight reduction, from July through to March, the amount of contacts coming into our Families First service was actually 6.6% higher than the previous year. And the big important sort of pull out from this is actually the increase in domestic abuse. So you've probably seen quite a lot on the news about the impact of domestic abuse during the pandemic, particularly during lockdown periods. And actually, of our contacts that came into Families First that related to domestic abuse, that actually increased by 63%, quite a considerable increase there. So next, moving on to education, health and care plans. So an education, health and care plan is the plan that's put in place to support a young person who has a special educational need or disability. Again, a sort of similar picture. So actually, if you look at the whole year, it actually looks like demand is slightly down on last year. But actually what's happened is there was a considerable drop off in activity at the beginning of the year when schools were closed. Health input is required as part of the education, health and care plan, and some of that also wasn't available as health services were moved to the front line to deal with the pandemic. So that meant that there was quite a significant drop off at the beginning of the year. However, from July through to December, the number of requests for plans has actually gone up by 8.6%, and we're continuing to see that sort of into this current financial year as well. So we're expecting in the next year there'll actually be an increase in activity, and we'll have to look at how we manage that demand. One of the stats I wanted to draw your attention to was around annual reviews. So you'll see there 15.1% of annual reviews were completed in time. On the face of it, that doesn't look very good. And one of the main reason behind that is that during the pandemic, a backlog was built up, and we're now clearing that backlog. But that means that a lot of the annual reviews that are completed are actually completed. They've already gone beyond that time scale, but that backlog is reducing, and we can provide the data around that if needed. Next, just want to talk about referrals to social care. So these are referrals that are accepted into children's social care and deemed as meeting the threshold for social care statutory intervention. You may have seen on the news this morning the social care review that was published, and one of the sort of findings that's come out of that from the national picture is about how too many families are sort of pushed into the realm of social care and not enough families are supported through early help. That's not the case in Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire actually has one of the lowest rates of referrals coming into children's social care in the country. And it's that same picture I've said with the previous data. If you look at it year on year, it looks like we've had an overall reduction over the year. However, it's actually, you can see on the chart there. So basically what I've tried to plot on the chart is sort of the period when the schools were closed. There was a period over the summer where some year groups were allowed back into school, so reception, year 1 and year 6 in primary school. And you can see that the number of referrals started to increase then. In August, obviously the schools are closed, so actually it's broadly the same as previous years. And then September, when the schools opened again, we saw a bit of a spike and it dropped back down. And then if you look in March, we see a much bigger spike, and actually that's considerably higher than the other spikes when schools reopened, and that has actually continued into April. It's leveled off a bit in May, but we're still expecting a sort of a big increase in demand over the next year. Again, same themes coming up. So domestic abuse referrals, while not as high as in Families First, are 26% higher. So it's still a considerable issue. And also the sort of where the referrals are coming from. So historically, before the pandemic, we used to typically receive about a third of our referrals from health, a third of our referrals from, well, about 30%, sorry, 30% from health, 30% from police, 30% from schools, and then 10% from other areas such as housing, neighbours, or self-referrals. But actually, we're now seeing a much bigger proportion coming from the police. So while schools have gone back to previous levels, police referrals still remain higher than previous years, and that's what's led to that overall increase. Next slide is looking at initial child protection conferences within 15 days of a Section 47 investigation. So a Section 47 investigation is when it's deemed that there's a risk of significant harm to the child or young person. And from that point onwards, they have 15 days to schedule a child protection conference. This is one of the stats that was in the news report this morning. And they were saying that actually there was too many families going on to a child protection conference, which didn't lead to a child protection plan, sort of basically saying they were unnecessarily sort of taken through the whole process of a conference. Nationally, the picture's 67% that was quoted in the stats in the report. In Hertfordshire, actually 89% of our child protection conferences lead to a child protection plan. So there's a much smaller number of families that actually go through the whole process, and then it's deemed that they shouldn't be on a plan, which is really good. With the pandemic, we saw sort of earlier in the year, I think, sort of as people were sort of more worried about those extra bits of support not being around, more children going on to into child protection conferences. However, it started to level off now and return back to normal levels. Another positive that's come out from the pandemic is how we've actually managed to use technology to improve attendance at child protection conferences. So there's a wide range of professionals attend these conferences, so teachers from school, health professionals, GPs, and sometimes they may find it difficult to attend a face-to-face meeting in a council building. However, if they can join sort of via virtually, and it might be, we've implemented sort of hybrid conferences where some people are in the room and other people join by video, and that's actually meant we've had much better attendance at those meetings, and that's something that will be taken forward into the future. Next is the number of children who are subject to a child protection plan. So you may have heard of family safeguarding. If not, you'll hear quite a lot about it in the next year, sort of as you sort of progress through your time in your position. And the family safeguarding approach has actually led to a considerable reduction in the number of children subject to a child protection plan because of the way that the families are supported. And we currently have 437 children subject to a child protection plan, which is one of the lowest rates in the country. And it's a 5.2% reduction compared with the previous year. The impact of the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, where it might not have been deemed sort of safe to go into houses and do as many face-to-face visits as we normally would, we used sort of video calls and virtual interactions. However, now the large majority of the visits are now being carried out face-to-face. And during the period when the schools were closed, children with child protection plans, children in need, and also children looked after were still able to attend school, and the majority did. So next, moving on to children subject to a child protection plan for a second or subsequent time. This has started to increase. So it started increasing from about September onwards and has hit a high of 22.7%, which equates to about 135 children. And those coming back onto a child protection plan within 2 years has increased to 10.6%. And there's been a lot of audit work that's gone into sort of looking at what the reasons are behind this. and a lot of it is around the sort of the level of support when the child protection plans ends, and making sure that the support is there to so when a child that finishes a child protection plan, they'll automatically go onto a child in need plan, but they'll still have a social worker, and then they'll be stepped down to sort of universal support or early help. And it's been recognised that possibly during the pandemic that some of that universal support may not have been as accessible as it would have been before the pandemic. So there's a lot of work now going on to make sure that when cases are stepped down, we make sure that that additional support is put in so that children don't come back onto a child protection plan. Next is our number of children looked after. So for the last few years, our number of children looked after has been fairly stable around the 900 to 950 mark. However, sort of over the summer period, it was great, started gradually sort of creeping up by about 10 each month, and peaked in December at 1,004 children. The main reason for this, well, there's two reasons basically. There was slightly more children coming into care. However, there was a lot less children who are exiting care, and there's a wide range of reasons behind that. So the impact of the pandemic on courts meant that adoptions and special guardianship orders were delayed, which meant that the children stayed in care longer. Also with adolescents, there's a lot of one-to-one work with families and sort of I'm trying to think how to word it, but basically intervention work where the families will sit together and sort of talk through their issues and sort of work out how to safely return the young person back home. With all the sort of COVID restrictions and social distancing and things, it made it much more difficult to do those interventions. However, there's as sort of restrictions have started to ease, there's been a lot of work actually looking at how we reunite those children and young people with their families, and the numbers have started to go down now. So I think there are about 977 now, actually 973. So it's going in the right direction now, but it was basically the impact of the pandemic on that. So when I presented at the previous panel, there was a question asked about when I was presenting the percentage of children who exited care via adoptions and special guardianship orders. There was a question asked as to where do all of the other children who exit care go. So I just thought we'd put this chart up and just share some of that information so people have an idea when you leave care, where do they go. So sort of, I won't go through every single bit, but basically just give some of the highlights. So the biggest group is 29%, and that's actually children who have been reunified with their families and returned home. The next biggest one is 22%, and that's going on to independence. So that's basically young people turning 18 and going on to sort of live independently. The next one after that is staying put, which is it's a process which is supported by government funding, which actually allows the young person to stay with their foster carer after they turn 18, I believe until they're 21. So they actually will stay in that foster care placement as a young adult. And then the other one, largest one, was those who go on to adult care services. So that's primarily young people who have disabilities or need further support as adults. So the next measure I just want to talk through is children looked after with 3 or more placements. So this is a Department for Education measure. It looks at our children in care and how many different placements they've had in the last 12 months. So it could be new children coming into care who had a temporary placement and then changed placement, or it could be children who've been in care longer and for whatever reason their placement has broken down, or they've decided they wanted to change placement and they've moved into another placement. And if that happens 3 or more times in the last 12 months, then that's what's reported here. There's been a lot of progress on this. So historically, we were around 13%, which placed Hertfordshire in the bottom 25% of the country. We've done a lot of work sort of working with foster carers and understanding the reasons why placements might break down and how we can better support those placements to make sure that the young person can remain in a stable placement. And that's improved to 8.9%, which is our best performance ever. And we're now in the top 25% of the country, which is really good. And that's sort of built on a lot of work that's been going on over the last 3 years to improve this. Next, so I touched on this a little bit on a slide a couple of slides back, and that's just looking at children who are exiting care to a special guardianship order or adoption. This has been impacted by the pandemic. So what we've actually seen in the financial year compared with the previous financial year is actually 14 less children have been adopted and 9 less children have been subject to a special guardianship order. The courts are starting to unblock now, more hearings are happening, so we expect, and you do often see with adoption and special guardianship orders, that you might get some years where there's a dip in performance and then the next year it'll actually increase, as we've sort of managed to match those children and young people with families. So we do expect that this will improve in the coming year. However, it has reduced over the last 12 months. The next slide is looking at care leavers aged 17 to 21 and whether they're in education, employment or training. So basically, what we found here is actually that there's been a drop in performance, and that's basically because of the pandemic, that we knew that young people would be affected more than other groups, because the types of work that they do tend to be the type of jobs that have been affected by the closures due to the pandemic, and actually those from vulnerable groups tend to be more adversely affected than other groups. And I know there's a lot of work going on now to work out how we can support those young people and get them back into employment, education and training. And that's everything from me. If you've got any questions.
There we go, I'm coming on, I think. Thanks very much, Paul. Could you take the slides down, please, and then we can... So if I can kick off, if I might. You commented that the levels of referrals by police are still quite high. Do we know why? What's that? Have they changed their way of working, or is it just a little bit more risk averse following COVID? Who'd like to answer that one? Joe, Jenny?
Matt, I think. Matt. Yes.
Thanks, Chair. I think there's a range of reasons. I think there's what we've all talked about is this unmet need and unknown need, which has built up. We work really, really closely with police colleagues, and they've been part of our weekly additional meetings throughout the pandemic to talk about operational matters. So I don't think there's been any seismic shift in thinking in terms of referrals. I think it's the nature of where we are currently in terms of what's happening around the communities.
Okay, thank you. And just looking at the second time going on to a child protection plan again, can you, Matt, just elucidate how we've improved the support there around that?
So I think our audit work pointed to 2 main issues, which Paul alluded to. So the first one being, I think when we were moving children out of the child protection arena, perhaps some of the services that would normally be in place weren't there for families, and therefore some of that change that they achieved wasn't sustained and children have had to come back on plans. I think also we know that vulnerable families have been under increased pressure, and I think that has caused a range of additional needs to resurface around domestic violence, drug and alcohol misuse, which has meant that some of our interventions that we hope would achieve sustained change haven't been probably as successful as what we would have seen previously. And I think also it can't be reiterated enough that whilst we've maintained providing our interventions, we are a relationship-based service, and moving those interventions onto a virtual platform has had an impact at times. Yeah. So I think a combination of factors. It's something that we're really conscious of and looking at very carefully. I'm working closely with Tendai and the performance and audit team with my heads of service to look at how the child protection chairs are also making decisions at the review child protection conferences to make sure that children don't come off child protection plans until everybody feels that's the right thing to do.
Okay, great. And just finally, can I congratulate you all on the children looked after, 3+ placements? I mean, that's been a brilliant piece of work. I remember when we were some of the lowest in the country. So you know, we're really up there now. So congratulations to the team on that. Sorry, it's unusual for me to ask things, but there we go. So I've got Nigel, Anthony, and Mark Watkin.
Thank you, Chair. And can I also be associated with the congratulations on 9-3? I did mention to Jenny in briefing on the best ever performance on the percentage of children looked after with 3 or more placements, so that's very good. Going back to 6.2 and obviously worrying about the 63% increase in cases of domestic abuse in 2021, and of course we have to take into account a lot of this is to do with the pandemic, but can officers just come back again with what measures you're looking at to ameliorate this on this? And then similar to what you've asked, Teresa, on 8.1, 8.2 and 8.3 to do with child protection, taking it and the figures, taking into account you know, the report we've just had today. Obviously we all haven't had a chance to read it properly, but the government's reviewing of children's social care and the fact that the way the figures are reporting, I just wondered if officers, or if we're deciding to look at how we report and whether that's going to be looked at because of maybe this skewing in the figures. I don't know. And then also, can I just comment on the NEAT figures and the fact, you know, 9.9 I think it is, and what you're obviously looking on now. I'm pleased on 9.9 that there's various things that you've and I've talked to Jenny about this as well, and it's good that you're looking at. I've lost it now. Here we are. 9.9. Yeah, obviously the ring-fenced employment opportunities with the council, for example, care leavers covenant, and developing a youth hub. And so I don't know if all of these things will hopefully help on the NEAT figures, which clearly we're always worried when if the figures on NEAT go up. So I just wondered if you could at least come back on some of those. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nigel. Can I just comment on child protection, care review and statistics? I think in Hertfordshire, as you will have seen, if you've had an opportunity to look at the report or just put in Hertfordshire and look for it to be referenced, that what we do and how we do it is seen as exemplar in the country. So we do obviously have to read the report and consider what's said, and we will comment going through. But I think at the moment, I think we're probably one of those authorities that's very well placed to deal with whatever it said. I haven't read it all either yet, I have to admit. It's 154 pages, but I will. So Jenny, so just do domestic abuse first. Who wants to deal with that? Or is that you going to deal with that, Jenny?
I'll just do that and then I'll hand over to Matt. I'll just a couple of comments. Paul knows what I'm going to say. Even though the percentage that came through as contacts to Families First and then, if necessary, went on to social care, was that percentage of the overall contacts increased overall in Hertfordshire. In terms of police contacts, there was an increase, but that was 9% across the county. Variable, as those of you who've seen domestic abuse figures before, it does vary across the county, particularly in urban areas. That's higher, as you'd expect, because more people are living there. But so overall we saw an increase, but it wasn't a 63% increase across the county. That is the percentage of contacts that came into our early help contact and referral service. So just to have some clarity around that. And the domestic abuse partnership very much responded over the last year. And are doing as we go forward as our children's services. This is an area where families really were under pressure, and we know that helplines not only in Hertfordshire but across the country saw an increase in calls. So it's very, very much in our sights in terms of support right across that spectrum of early help and social care support. Thanks, and I'll leave to Matt to pick up the other questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, obviously we have our family safeguarding model, so we have specialist domestic abuse workers that are placed in our teams, and they are obviously working really, really well with families. They're also supporting our child practitioners, so our not social work staff, our alternative qualified staff, that work in our teams with some of those skills to work with families as well. So we're using the adult workers to provide interventions and also upskill our own staff, because we know domestic abuse and domestic violence is a continuing challenge for some families in our communities. In terms of the other questions, I think the chair may have answered the second question around data and etc. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'll start with the NEAT figure for children for care leavers, and then I'll also perhaps Joe may want to jump in. Additional to what you were saying, we've also held an event last week, which brought together lots of local businesses to talk about how we can have apprenticeships for care leavers that are from Hertfordshire, and we had a real success with that, a really good response from local businesses, and we're really hoping that's going to be a productive partnership going forward, and there'll be some additional meetings over the next weeks and months around that. So really hopeful, because we're again very, very aware that the pandemic and obviously the industries that maybe some of our care leavers would work in have been significantly challenged by employment due to the pandemic.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's anything further around.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Just to build on that slightly, Nigel, I think you ask a really good question. Certainly the numbers of NEAT for our more vulnerable young people, so care leavers, also those with learning difficulties and those known to the youth justice system. You know, those figures aren't quite where we want them, and we continue to work really hard to support those vulnerable groups. Our services for young people provide both some sort of one-to-one dedicated support for young people in terms of supporting them back into school or into training and employment, but also engage really well with our employers, our local businesses, to try and make sure that those young people are getting work experience, apprenticeships, and indeed work opportunities. So there's a lot of work going on, and I think as we take forward in the future our skills and lifelong learning strategy, there's a real opportunity to drive at that harder and faster to make sure we get it right, particularly as we come out of the pandemic, and that's something I'm really keen to see.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow
up. Anthony.
Thank you, Teresa. I've just got 3 questions and I'll do them all together. On children looked after, we've had a bit of a discussion and it was in the presentation very helpful. Obviously the numbers went up strikingly, but you report that there is now a reduction. I'm just sort of wondering in terms of, I think we've had this before, it's about 50,000 per young person. Have we received any additional financial support because of the additional numbers that have been coming forward, and many of them clearly linked in a whole range of different ways to the pandemic? There's a reference in 922 to Task and Finish Group about children looked after, and I wondered what the reporting sequence for that is. The second question, I think this came up, but Matt referred to it, and it's in the text about hybrid meetings, and you highlighted, you know, some ways in which that's really helpful because you can get professionals together. But I think you also hinted there may be some, you know, there's some downsides in terms of how you hear the voice, for example, of children. And I just wondered whether, you know, maybe you could say a little bit more about that, because that clearly is going to be the way forward, and how we ensure that everybody's voice is heard. And the third question, and I really preface it by, you know, behind all this that's reported here is so much extraordinary work done by your colleagues, the office, your colleagues, in tough times. And I'm just wondering, we talked once or twice last year about recruitment and about trying to get returnees back into service, and I just wonder what the overall state of the workforce recruitment and retention is, and whether there are any trends that should either encourage or perhaps worry us. Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, thanks. So Jenny, do you want to take the funding bit?
I will. Yes, absolutely. So the answer is yes, Anthony. There has been increased funding put in from the COVID grants money that the council's received from the government to support around the that rise in number of children in care, and indeed there's a recognition, not only by the council but other local authorities and indeed Department of Education, that within that there is a really big pressure on placements for children in care across the country, particularly those with complex needs. And as you know, that's why we as a council have got our residential and fostering strategy that we've been working on for the last 18 months. But yes, there has been increased funding, and also Matt has got additional resource in. Not all qualified social workers, because as you said, it is a challenge to recruit qualified social workers, but a range of people from a range of backgrounds to almost provide a peripatetic support which can go across both social care and early help. And we have that for the remainder of this year for increase in referrals and work. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. So Matt, do you want to pick up the CLA task force, hybrid meetings and recruitment and retention, although Jenny's just covered that a bit?
Yeah, of course. When we had the increase in children looked after numbers, core board asked for a task and finish group to be set up, which I've been chairing ever since December. We've got officers from across the service represented at those meetings. What we understand from our audit work and looking at our data is that the increase was twofold. It was that children the rate of children leaving care had decreased. So we normally see a certain amount of children leave care, and that had decreased for a range of reasons, and the number of children coming into care at the same time had increased. So two factors that made that overall number increase. So we've set up a task and finish group, and that work's been focused on not reducing the number of children in care, but making sure that if we have a child in care, it's for the right reason and for the right amount of time. We've looked at the interventions and work that's provided by our colleagues in Specialist Adolescent Service, who provide excellent support around children on the edge of care and keeping children with their families. Some of that work was, I guess, hindered by the pandemic, so we've looked at refreshing that and where possible, sort of put in additional resource to support children to go home. We've also looked at children that have been in care where maybe actually we can rebuild relationships with their family and look at returning those children home and revoking the care order, which is a process where we go back to court and say this child no longer needs to be subject to a care order to the local authority. And again, that's been some successful work around that, and we're in the process of successfully doing that with a number of children. So there's a range of actions that we've been following, and one of the key activities of that group also has been to track the sort of the coming ins and the leavers, and monitor the financial position really closely to that. So we've got colleagues from finance in those meetings, so we're making sure that we're very, very diligent about our costs and expenditure linked to this particular increase. In terms of the hybrid meetings, just to expand on what Paul said, there's some huge benefits to them. So we're seeing attendance from a range of additional professionals that perhaps sometimes would have been harder to achieve face-to-face. So a GP is a really, really good example that have always historically been hard to get them to attend conferences for obvious reasons. So that's been a real positive. There's also been some feedback about engagement from fathers, that some fathers are finding it easier to engage virtually. But obviously, like anything in life, I guess for some families, that sort of hybrid approach won't feel comfortable or won't work. What we're clear about in our child protection teams and our child protection chairs is they'll offer a flexibility of approaches. So the hybrid model can work for many, many families. But if there is a family that feels like that's not going to be suitable for them, we will make sure that we provide a conference that's face-to-face. So we're in the process of that, and that will be a process of learning as well. So as we're going through and doing more hybrid conferences, we'll be making sure we sort of capture learning from other professionals, children and young people, and also their families. And then lastly, the recruitment and retention question, which is a really, really important question for all of us. because obviously our staff are our most valuable resource, and overall recruitment has remained stable. So we're in a fortunate and strong position in Hertfordshire in terms of a stable workforce. We have seen a slight increase more recently, certainly in my area of responsibility. So the statutory social work child protection teams have seen some people move on. We're looking at that really carefully. We're looking at the reasons why staff have decided to move on, and there's a range of reasons. There's not one in particular. We've done some work with the universities over the last few weeks. We've had officers have been to the university to talk to students. We're looking at our offer for newly qualified social workers. So that's been, something that's been really important through the pandemic to make sure we've got right. We've taken feedback from our social workers that have been through that first year, and we're building that into the offer for next year. And we're looking at sort of what it is that our more experienced staff want to stay with us. So, there's many reasons why social workers want to work in Hertfordshire, because of the good atmosphere that's created by leadership, because of the approach of family safeguarding, and because of the sort of manageable levels of allocations on their caseloads. But we need to make sure that we look at all areas of retention. So we want to make sure that there's opportunities for people to develop through our services. So we're in the process of refreshing our workforce strategy as well, which will be drafted over the summer and ready for consideration in the early autumn.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I think I'm correct in saying, aren't I, that we are having a little bit of a problem trying to recruit for our new residential care homes, management-wise, because there's so many different areas that we have to recruit from. So could you just mention that a little bit?
Yeah, I probably focus too much on social workers because that's my remit. But yeah, I mean, nationally, that is a challenge and has been for some time. The residential children market is a very challenging place to work. People do such valuable work caring for some children that can be quite hard to care for at times, but hugely rewarding work. But it doesn't have particularly strong financial benefits to it. So recruiting good people into that sector has been a challenge. Recruiting a responsible, qualified manager that has to be approved by Ofsted, again, can be challenging because they need to have significant experience of the residential sector. So when Marion talks about increasing our residential provision, it's not as straightforward as just thinking about buildings. We have to think about the infrastructure that sits around that in terms of staffing.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a national conversation. Probably, I'm assuming it's in the care review case for change, because, as you said, we're not the only authority that struggles, and also private providers struggle. So there is about how we train people or bring them forward, because it's very much vocation. So thank you for that. Okay, Anthony, can we move on? Yep, great, thank you. Mark Watkin.
Thank you very much, Terry, and I'll get my camera going in a second. There we go. Is it going? Yes. Right. First of all, some of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked in a variety of forms. I'm just going to say, for the record, really, can we just have a statement about the annual review figures for education healthcare plans not being as high as we wanted. Paul actually did a very good job at giving us a bit of background on it. And may I compliment Paul actually on the quality of his reporting to this committee. It doesn't half make our life easier to be able to get underneath the skin of what officers tell us. And his objectivity and clarity is exemplary. So I wanted to put that on record. That's my first one. On 8.3, which was I don't remember what it is now, as potential children subject to a second plan or subsequent time, we're still in the third quartile. We're doing so much better elsewhere. I just wanted to understand why that element is something that's not quite where it might be compared to some of the others. Just out of interest, Jenny, you mentioned in the presentation this morning that the government would look at, talk about UASC, I beg your pardon, I might have put the context in here, that the government might expect us to have, I think it was 0.07% of our total population of children as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and you said that wasn't achievable. It would be just interesting to know what that figure would be for Hertfordshire. It sets the context of, if you like, reality against expectation. We talked about the CLA. Anthony mentioned the CLA Task Force group. Yes, just one last comment, and I'm really glad that we're beginning to sort of, we often talk about the staffing problems, the social worker problems. I mean, I've picked up an issue in East Herts about the SEN team has got lots of vacancies there at the moment for social workers, and it's impacting on some of the HCP plans. I just wonder whether there's some way of capturing that in a kind of KPI form that we understand. I don't mean to the detail of every single team and every single vacancy. That would be ludicrous and not helpful. But equally well, we don't have anything that sort of gives us a flavour of the difficulty of trying to recruit. I just wonder whether that could be built in as some part of the KPI reporting element. It's been brought out in questioning, but it's lost in the noise, if I can dare I use that term, when in actual fact, of course, it's fundamental to supporting what we're trying to achieve. So I really open the question up for discussion as to see whether, Jenny, there is some way that can be done. And Jenny, I can be very cheeky. The performance of your organisation has been so much better over the time that you've been leading it, and we shall miss you. And I shall leave others to comment why I'm saying that if you want to, but thank you so much for all you've done for the children of Hertfordshire. So that was.
So thanks, Mark. We've got Jenny for one more meeting.
We've still got my farewell then.
No, it's too soon.
Too soon. July, yeah.
Jenny for the July panel.
Yes,
yeah. So not yet, guys. Hold back. She's still got a lot to do.
Certainly have, Terry.
Yeah. So just in relation to KPIs around vacancies and workloads, I've already spoken to Matt about that. Certainly around caseloads, we were going to try and reflect that somehow. He's got all the data. It's just about how we get it built into what we report, and I'd quite like that to be reported into the corporate reporting and not just our panel reporting, because I think that's quite important. So we are looking at that. Matt, but do you want to comment on the West Hart situation? I think it said West Hart, did you?
I think that was Send, wasn't it? I mean, I was going to suggest.
Sorry, it was East Hart actually, as it happened.
I think it was the Send, wasn't it? I think, or the ISL teams. I think that as a senior management team, we do monitor hard to recruit case areas, occupations. One of them social work, another is educational psychologists, and I can see Joe nodding. So that might be a way forward. I'm thinking, chair and panel members, because certain occupations are more difficult to recruit to rather than, the whole thing. And that might make it quite manageable and enable panel to get under what we're doing in those more difficult areas. Don't know what my colleagues think.
I think that sounds useful. But again, we're not alone on this one. There's a national shortage. And so that's hopefully going to come out in the care review as well. Matt, did you want to say, look as if you want to say something, Matt? No.
I was agreeing with Jenny, and we have that data, and I can work with Paul and HR colleagues to see how we incorporate it into this report. Okay, so going back to the beginning of Mark's question, statements, annual review statements. Joe, do you want to say something around that?
Yes, thank you, Chair, if I may. And I'm going to try and keep it really simple, because I think this whole annual review process can get quite technical and quite complicated. But just to try and sort of put a bit of flesh on the bones for you. So schools do our annual reviews, and then they send them through to our annual review team, our SEND team, who process them, make amendments and finalise them. And the statistic that Paul referred to, that 15%, refers really to the period of time between the 4 weeks between the annual review meeting in the school with the child and parents and the point at which we finalise the plan. And really what we're looking at there is the backlog of annual reviews. And I use that term, well, I hesitate to use that term because we are talking about children and families, some real people on the end of this. But essentially Hertfordshire, along with many other local authorities, have struggled to meet the timeline for completion of annual reviews, that 4-week period, because of the sheer volume of work, the sheer volume of education healthcare plans coming through the system. I'm not saying that as an excuse, I'm putting that by way of context. So what are we doing about it? About 6 months ago, we invested in a new team. We've called it our Arrows team, but its sole purpose is to focus on annual reviews. So picking up the annual reviews from the schools when they're completed with the parents and young person, and making sure that we make the amendments and finalise those plans as rapidly as we can. And what I can tell you is the number of annual reviews that we're working through by that team has doubled. So prior to the team coming in, we tended to finalise around 100 to 150 plans a month. And when I look at the April and May data, we were finalising between 350 and 400 plans a month. What that means is we are getting through the backlog. However, at the point at which we finalise those annual reviews, they're already out of date because of the length of time they've been in the system. So it's not that the work isn't being done. It now is being done, but we're working through a backlog, a waiting list of annual reviews, and we're absolutely committed to getting that right for our children and young people. Another quick point of better news is that once we now pick up that annual review from a school, we're now finalising 80% of those within the 4-week period. So at the point at which we're picking them up and begin to work on them, we're turning them around quite rapidly. So there is some really good work going on in the system. And what I anticipate, Mark, is that in future we'll be able to come back to you and give you much better performance reporting on our annual reviews that begins to reflect some of the other good news, good practice you can see across the SEND system. So, you know, we're up there, 93% of our EHC education healthcare plan requests are done within the 20-week period. Now that's streets ahead of our statistical neighbours and the England average, which is about 58%. So we need to set our sights high on really driving up the annual reviews, and that's what we're working on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Terry, can you just come back with just a clarification question on that, if I may?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I understand that correctly, Joe, the schools generate the start of the annual review process. Do we have evidence that the schools themselves are struggling to get those reviews done in a timely fashion? You know, does that sort of, where does the clock start ticking? Does it start ticking when it comes to us and we have 4 weeks? Or hopefully the clock should tick from the annual review date. Doesn't matter who's in the system, schools or us. Yeah, the parents and the child deserve to have their review completed in a timely manner. Can you just?
Yeah, good question, Mark, and absolutely. Prior to the pandemic, we know that schools were doing the annual reviews on time. The delay was around the time at which we then made the amendments and finalised the annual review. However, during the pandemic, of course, schools were closed, so many annual reviews got delayed during that time. We did undertake a number of annual reviews, even whilst children were being educated remotely. However, many parents asked for those annual reviews to be delayed at the time, and we gave them the choice to do that because they wanted health advice to come into their annual review process, and many of our health professionals had been redeployed. So there is an additional delay in schools actually holding the annual review that happened during the pandemic. So I know it gets really complicated, but outside of the pandemic, we know that our schools were on the ball in terms of doing the annual review with the parents. The backlog was around our capacity to really process and finalise those annual reviews, and that's the bit we're now setting right.
Okay.
That was a very helpful answer. Thank you, Joe. And if we could just cover the USE one, if you like, Jane.
So we've got US, so that's Jenny,
probably. Yeah, I'll pick up that. So what I was saying this morning, Mark, is that there is an agreed sort of national level, and the reason that Hertfordshire, that would be 190 children unaccompanied asylum seekers under 18, and the reason that Hertfordshire doesn't seem to get near there, it ranges between about 80 and 115 at any one time, is because the age of these young people when they come into care is 16 or 17. So within a year, they are over 18 and they are not part of that 0.07. If we looked at our UASC population, if I can call it that, as a whole, which includes over 18s, because we support them up to the age of 25, as you know, then it would be over the 0.07, or certainly around that. We've got over 250 care leavers who are unaccompanied asylum seekers. That's right, Matt, I think, isn't it? So, so if you put that with roughly the 80 to 100, we're talking at any one time at roughly about 350 in that cohort.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, fine. Thanks very much. Paula, you had your hand up, then it disappeared. I'm not quite sure if you have a question.
A lot of my questions have been answered, Teresa,
Oh.
and I just wanted to say that there's so much good work going on, and despite COVID, it's been one of the worst periods, and to see that some of our figures have actually increased, that is really heartening. I just also wanted to mention about our foster carers. And obviously, we don't want to see our children going outside of Herts. And I heard this morning that the campaign to have Hertfordshire foster parents is doing very well. And maybe we could, the districts and ourselves could help promote that in our areas. And maybe that's something we could look at. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Teresa.
Okay, thanks, Paula. I'm sure Matt will be in touch. Yeah, I mean, we will arrange a session, I think, probably with our fostering and care leaver section, because that's part of our corporate parenting. So it's very important that members do learn about that. And I suppose probably that's going to be a separate session, will it, Matt, at a lunchtime?
Yeah, that's what the plan was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Do we know when that might come through?
Well, I haven't got clear dates yet.
Okay.
I can work with Jenny and others outside of this, and we can come back to you as a panel with those times. Dates.
I think it would be quite useful if we could fit it in before the summer break, okay, if possible. But I know there's lots of training going on, so you know, members' diaries are probably really quite full. But I think that would be really really useful, and open that up obviously to all councillors. Yeah. Okay, so I don't think there are any more questions, so I'm going to have to ask you to pop into the chat section. It gets very confusing, doesn't it? And you're being asked to note. So the panel is asked to scrutinise current performance and comment on any areas for improvement and or interest. So I think we've done that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're there now. So thank you, Paul. It's always a good report. Thank you very much. So I think everybody will be really interested when we actually do our tartan rug a little bit later on in the year, and they can see what else goes on in the region. So look forward to that one. Okay, fine. Thanks very much. Thank you. So we're now on to item 5 of the agenda, which is Serious Violence Strategy 2018 to 21, Hertfordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership Summary of Key Achievements. And Joe, you're going to give us a presentation along with John Max. So John, can you introduce yourself as well, please?
I'm not sure. John, are you on the call? It might be that Jackie Clemetson's here instead.
Is it Jackie as well? I saw John in participants, but are you doing this, Jackie?
I'm going to do the presentation, but Jackie's here by way of just answering questions, Terry.
Okay, so Jackie, can you just introduce yourself first and then...
Will do, Terry. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Jackie Clements and I'm Head of Family Support and Young People Services. And obviously, I'm very much part of the Serious Youth Violence, sits within my service area.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Jo.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check you can see the presentation on your screen?
Yes.
Yes.
It's tiny. Can you expand it?
Oh,
or can somebody expand it?
No, bear with. Layout section, animate slideshow. Let's see if this works. Customize, present online. Oh, here we go. There we go. Is that better?
Yes, thank you. That's much better. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, thank you, Chair. I'm Jo Fisher. I'm the Operations Director for Children and Young People. And you've had the report. And what I want to do with this presentation is both provide an overview of the strategy to date for serious violence, and the work undertaken, but also very briefly at the end, just update you on our refresh of the strategy that is currently underway and give you some idea of key areas and priorities that we're going to focus on moving forward. So our current serious violence strategy was based on a comprehensive needs assessment that was undertaken back in 2018, which noted a couple of key things. One is that knife crime across the county had increased over the previous 3 years by about 44%. And indeed, we're continuing to see this. So in 2020, there was a 17% increase in knife crime, particularly related to domestic abuse and drug misuse. But it also noted continuing and escalating concerns about the impact of serious violence on our young people in Hertfordshire. And indeed, 45% of hospital admissions for knife wounds in Hertfordshire affects the under 24s. And both at a community level, but also reports from our police, from the youth justice and from our schools, note continuing concerns for young people around county lines and gang affiliated behaviour. And in a recent survey of young people noted the prevalence of knives and incidents involving knives for young people. Around 1 in 20 young people said that they'd either seen, heard of, or been, present at an incident with a knife. So that just goes to show that we really do need to get underneath this. Has my sharing window gone? Can I just check?
No, you're there. You're fine.
You can still see it. Okay, I can't.
Okay.
But I'll just. For some reason, I seem to have spotlighted. I haven't touched my screen, but I've lost the presentation. Let's see if I can just write that.
So you've gone back. You've gone about 4 slides on.
Yeah, I'm just going to have to stop sharing it. I'm sorry, Jackie. Are you able to share it? No, I'm going to try again. I'll start again. My screen just configured itself. Apologies. Let's get back into this. Right, it's back now. Oh. Right, sorry. I'm just getting back up to the top. Are you looking at slide number 2 still?
Yes.
Good. Okay, I'm just going to come back to the screen. So that's a comprehensive needs assessment. The strategy puts in place an all-age strategy, really focused on partnership work and prevention.
Sorry, Joe, just to interrupt you. You've gone back to being in an ordinary display mode rather than slideshow mode. It would really help on slideshow. Sorry.
Wrong current slide. Right, is that any better, Mark?
Much better, thank you.
Good. Let's hope the screen doesn't get taken over again. So it's an all-age strategy, massive focus on prevention, early intervention, and really getting under the root causes of serious violence and gang affiliation. And the governance for this, if I can just get my screen to move on. The governance for this is quite cross-cutting governance, with the strategy reporting to a number of strategic boards. You can see them in front of you: the Community Safety Board, Domestic Abuse, Drug and Alcohol, ION, Integrated Offender Management, and then the 2 safeguarding boards in adults and children's services. And within children's services, what we did is really put a real focus on getting it right for children and young people, pulling together the police, schools, colleges, health, youth justice, social workers, but also our districts and community safety teams and the voluntary and community sector to really identify 4 overarching themes or priorities to nail over a 2-year period. And that's what I'm going to update you on in this presentation. So you can see them there: building resilience, developing our services, getting intelligence right, and workforce development. The first bit around building resilience, the voice of the children and young people. What we found and what we continue to hear from young people through our surveys are some key priorities: both mental health and emotional resilience, everything from their identity, their emotional security and friendship groups, but also concerns about schools and their future and their prospects and opportunities. And this gave us a real focus on the role of schools as our safeguarding partner and really building resilience for young people. So we launched our vulnerability toolkit that is now available on the professionals area of the Families First portal, but really equips schools to identify the early signs of young people who might be vulnerable to exploitation, and to then know how to get help. So a broad range of services and agencies that they can reach out to get wraparound support in their school. We also undertook some great work around breaking the chains. A drama group came into many schools and performed for over 2,000 young people in years 7 and 8, a really quite hard-hitting drama around the risks of county lines and the risks of being affiliated with gangs and knives. And we had great feedback from this, many young people telling us through their schools that it really had given them pause for thought. And lastly, our Fearless launch that we undertook. Fearless is a website where young people can anonymously report crime and intelligence. And again, we launched that and we continue to have that available for young people. Moving on to the development of services, and you can see transitional safeguarding, but I'm going to come back to that when I talk about next steps. So first of all, in terms of developing our services, this was really about building on the really strong offer we already had in Hertfordshire, our integrated youth justice and adolescent service. And in April 2020, we launched our specialist adolescent service in Hertfordshire, our SASH team, which really targets young people most at risk of criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, being missing or homeless, and the edge of care. And it provides help and support, really works alongside young people and their families to prevent problems escalating. We broaden the lens. We don't just look at children and young people in their families. We recognise the risks that young people might be associated with from the place that they live in, the parks that they go to, the schools, their friendship and their peer groups. So a broad contextual safeguarding approach was embedded across the team. And we're beginning to see some real successes through that. And I know it's part of your papers, you got some of that data. But whilst we saw the numbers of adolescents in care during the pandemic slightly increase, that was mainly due to difficulties in really supporting young people to return home once they'd been in care. However, what we have seen when we look at the last 6 to 9 months of our work is really good successes in keeping young people out of care through this really targeted and intensive support approach. Of 29 young people we worked with in the last 7 to 8 months, 8 of them, 21 of them were prevented from going into care, so around 75%, and only 8 either came into care or remained in care and didn't come home. So there's a significant amount of work that's gone on. Another key theme was around intelligence sharing. And our MACE panels, you can see in front of you, are a central plank of that. So MACE is multi-agency child exploitation panels. And we implemented them in January. The MACE 1 very much looks at our top young people at risk. So how are we going to support those young people at risk, and what does that individualised and personalised support look like for them? But MACE 2, the first meeting of which happened in April of this year, is very much looking across the system at the intelligence and the data. So what do we know about county lines? What do we know about organised crime and the drug market? What do we know about cuckooing? And how do we pull all of that together so that we can begin to, with our partners, begin to really think about how we target our services and how we support our young people. So some really good work happening. Now you have to forgive me because on my screen the presentation has stopped showing and I'm just going to keep going. I think every time somebody's changing their screen it just changes mine and I don't understand why. But I'm almost at the end of the presentation, so just bear with me. Lastly, the other bit about intelligence sharing was really about our front door. There was the decision making about young people and what level of support they got was slightly fragmented with it happening in our locality teams. And what we've done over the last 6 months, working really closely with our police colleagues, is pull that into an adolescent hub that sits in our front door, in our gateway team alongside our MASH, so that when a referral comes in for a young person, we have a coordinated assessment of need, assessment of risk, so that we can make sure that we're stepping the young person into the appropriate support service at the right time. And we've worked really closely with our districts on getting that right, because our youth action panels in the districts have a key role to play in all of this. And lastly, workforce development was the other key theme, and really getting a grip, not just on how we train our staff around contextual safeguarding and how they manage risks so that young people don't escalate into the care system, but can be safely worked with at home and in their local communities, but also putting in place a trauma-informed approach so that we can support our young people. Now, moving forward, we've really done some work on making sure that we're refreshing our survey, our strategy for serious violence. And that started back in November 2020. And that was across all age range. So it's children's services working with adult services and working with other corporate teams and partnerships. We sent a survey out to all of our partners and we had over 70 responses that really we're using now to shape our future priorities and considerations, including a continued emphasis on multi-agency working. The strategy is currently in draft and it has been informed by intelligence from the drug market profiling, cuckooing and drug supply, and serious violence, and has identified 4 key priorities: criminal exploitation of young people, criminal exploitation of adults, including cuckooing, county lines and drug supply, and availability of knives. And clearly some of those themes are cross-cutting and overlap. And within that, I see certainly 3 key priorities for children and young people as we move forward. One is the transitional safeguarding that I referenced earlier. It's early days, we're at the start of a key piece of work pulling together adult services, the districts, what's previously been called our SOS work within the districts and is now called No More, health, youth justice and our schools to really think about what happens to young people once they turn 18 and move into adulthood, and how do we best support them through the sort of key working approach through our districts that's in place, thinking about mental health and the transition from CAMS services and children through to adult mental health, but also really thinking about the skills and the opportunities our young people need so that they can move on, both in terms of their post-16 education, but also getting work experience, apprenticeships and jobs so that they can keep themselves safe. Another key plank of it will be the schools and really thinking about getting to the root causes of why young people get involved in serious violence. Again and again, we hear from young people that often the turning point, the tipping point for them is school exclusion. So that's something I think we need to look at in a stronger way and really think about that multi-agency support to our schools and our young people so that we can continue to include them in education and really building on some of the great work that we've got across our education support centres in Hertfordshire. So apologies for the technical problems. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation so that I can see you all again and come back to the screen and take any questions that you might have.
So thanks, Jo. Oh, I'm echoing. So can you turn your sound off, Jo? It might see if it's you. Okay, it was you. Excellent. Okay, so thanks for that. I quite agree with your comments around school exclusions. We need to do a good piece of work there, because once a young person feels disenfranchised, that's the sort of slow rot basically, and being part of a school is really important. So thoroughly support that one. So I have got questions from Nigel, D and Paula. So Nigel.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the excellent presentation by Jo. And I think, obviously, I've raised this, I know, at the full council, and I think to us, to all of us here, whatever other things we talk about, the serious violence strategy or the knife crime is something that's, I think we're asked, doesn't matter who it is, whether we live in urban areas like Watford or Stevenage, or whether we're in Broxbourne on the border with Tottenham and county lines in London. This is something that hits home. Someone will read about some knife crime in Watford, or they'll read about it, unfortunately, recently in Croxley, a much more rural area, and they'll say, well, what are you going to do about it? And it's good to get this report. Yeah, the first bit, which we've had before, it's hard to wade through, but I have done again. But after that, as you say, Jo, the more relevant bits is what you're doing about it, and the 6 boards. And I took out today before then, I had 512. I mentioned Jenny, the Breaking the Chain film. Be great if that could get out to every school. I don't necessarily won't. 5.3, the voice of the child. And again, you're talking about the survey. That's really important. And MACE 1 and MACE 2, as you said, and how you're bringing them together. But I also took important some of the other things there. That the fact I don't know whether this is up to date or whether this has changed now, but saying that the majority of knife crime in Hertfordshire is not gang related now. That may have changed now, I don't know. And then the fact that domestic abuse knife crime makes up 20% of Hert's knife crime. The same sort of figures we've had before about males 18 to 29 commit the knife crime against other males 18 to 29 in the main. But I noticed that stop and search decreased since 2016 in Hertfordshire. It's more targeted, but it's led to an increase in bladed articles being brought out. So, but that's very important, and I think that's good. But yeah, all the things you mentioned again to combat it, especially TRM, trauma recovery model, which we've had reports for before. That's good to hear. And again, I mentioned that the number of children missing from home obviously has increased in the last year, and that if you're concentrating on that, that's also very important. So overall, I welcome this, and the fact that we can say to our residents, wherever we are across the county, urban or rural, that we know that the county is working on this with our districts, with the police, with the police commission, doing what we can. But it's a lot of work being done, because I know you suddenly get some news headline, unfortunately another knife crime, and people think, oh well, nothing's being done. We can know that things are being done, but it's getting that across to people. And again, when you say about the ESCs, like we raised this morning in the induction, that's important, because when we say trying to stop school exclusions, even if it means going to, as Mark and I know, Chesbrook or some of the other ESCs, that is still education. It's still keeping them. We know where they are, and it's still actually getting even more one-to-one. But it's important. That's an important point. So thanks for all that. Mainly my comments are mainly comments, but just to say thanks for that and for that report. And I hope we will get another, whatever the latest is in 6 months' time. We'll get the latest update.
Definitely.
So, Jo, do you want to make any comments, or Jackie, do you want to make any comments?
There's a lot there, and I agree with everything that Nigel said. Just on the ESCs, I'll just pick the last comment, I think the ESCs are right at the heart of this, and some of our young people who've been involved in quite serious criminal activity and are known to our youth justice system, they're some of the hardest young people to place in schools in Hertfordshire, and often, you know, their schooling is either online or by tutors or through some level of outreach support. We are currently talking to our ESCs around actually how do we step that up and what is their role to make sure that we're actually educating them and we've got eyes on those young people. And it's something I'm really keen to take forward. We're getting a great reception from all of our ESCs on that, including Chesbrook, as you say. So hopefully moving forward, there'll be some really good work we can report on to from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want me to comment, Jo, or not?
If you've got anything to say,
I was just going to say, just the good work of the schools and gangs team, or the gangs and schools team even. They run a programme called Lives Not Knives, which is rolled out through schools and really well attended, and they've been doing that probably since 2018. So some good evaluation, some good results, and you know, obviously the dangers of carrying knives. I think it's worth mentioning that a lot of young people have reported carrying knives to keep safe, which is worrying in itself. But I think that programme, you know, is kind of, because actually if you've got a knife and you get into a situation where you feel unsafe, the likelihood is you're going to use it. So I think it's a really positive programme that is going out into schools. And just on Jo's point about inclusion, we have already started work about right across Jo's portfolio and beyond in terms of looking at an inclusion framework. So instead of sort of, you know, sometimes young people do very silly things within a school and it can result in a permanent exclusion on the first occasion. So really looking at what we can offer as a kind of support package. So for example, if a young person did take a knife into school, is that we as Children's Services can come in and deliver an intervention as an alternative to being excluded. It's very early days, but I think we need to offer it at kind of every level up till we get groups of young people, you know, in one particular school. So I think there's some really good work going on to progress as well.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
So it's Nigel. So we've got D now, please.
Thank you. Can I just say a very well written report, easy read and quite easy to follow. We're doing an awful lot of good work within Hertfordshire to improve these figures going forward regarding knife crime. And I'm talking about, no one's mentioned YC Hearts and the wonderful work they do in detached work with our young people. Also St Giles's Trust, very positive and engaging, and a local housing association. But one point that I never saw in the report, which does concern me a little bit, is, and I'm not being parochial here, I must say, where my division borders London and Essex, a number of my young children do not attend schools in Hertfordshire. They go to the London Borough of Enfield or across the border into Essex. Now, are these children falling through the net somehow because we can't engage with them because they don't attend Hertfordshire schools?
Jackie, shall I pick that up or do you want to? I'm happy to.
I don't mind picking it up. I mean, Families First includes YC Hearts and everybody you've mentioned. It's the broad brand, D, so it doesn't specifically miss them out. But good point. And they do an awful lot of great detached work and group work programmes. They shouldn't fall through the net. There's always one. It should be the home address as opposed to where they go to school. It happens in the quite a lot of parts of the county who have bordering London boroughs, and it should be the home address, etc. What we're also trying to do as part of the adolescent hub is look at a exploitation hub as well, where we're picking up much more data and intelligence, which will pick up if young people are going to schools in particular areas as well. I'd like to say it never happened, but it would sometimes, but it would be around the home address rather than where they go to school. I've had one very recently, a very similar kind of case that happened down in Rickmansworth.
Okay, so are we saying that if something occurs at school, so they're at school in Essex, if the school wanted to refer it, it would be referred into Hertfordshire because the child lives in Hertfordshire?
Yeah, absolutely,
okay.
It would be. It would come through our front.
Yeah. So we've got good cover, Dee, especially for those that go into London. So we can cover them. I'm not worried so much about Essex, but obviously for those that go into London.
Well appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Paula.
Thank you, Chair. That applies to me as well, bordering on to London Borough of Hillingdon. So that was really good to have that answer. And I hadn't thought of the question. So thanks, Dee. Yeah, just really some comments. I was really surprised to read that 25% of secondary pupils self-reported. And I really love the idea that we were actually getting these answers from them, that they carry a knife or another form of protection. But much higher than I thought that would be in our area, in Hertfordshire, rather than the London borough. Also, the fact that out of 35 shops selling knives, 15 failed, which means I presume they sold them to an underage child. I don't know how we're working with the police to try and rectify that. But the main thing is I thought this report was really good, and the what works section, the way things are joining up and working with different bodies really impressed me, especially as I'm new to this, and I had no idea just how much work goes into this. And the trauma recovery model, I've not seen that before, but it just nails it, doesn't it? You've got to feed a child before you can educate a child. It just goes right to the basics and works up. So just some comments there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paula. Jo?
Sure. Yeah, may I just, on the point about availability of knives and other weapons that Paula quite rightly makes, I know that our police colleagues are on it. It's something that we're working with. It's a key part of our strategy moving forward, is tackling the availability of knives and other weapons. And I know that police are working really closely with, shops to make sure there are safeguards about selling them and checks made before they're selling them. So that will be a key part of our strategy moving forward, and certainly one that I think we'll be able to come back and report greater success on.
So, Jo, is that something that trading standards should be looking at, perhaps?
Yeah, it's very much a corporate approach, Terry. So whilst that won't sit within children's services to do, the whole of the serious violence strategy is a partnership approach. And right at the heart of it is how we all work together towards having a shared impact on this issue across Hertfordshire. So the leadership, the operational grip will sit elsewhere. It'll sit with the police and our trading standards and people like that. But nonetheless, of course, it impacts on young people. If they can walk into a shop and easily get hold of a knife, then that impacts on our young people. So we've got a real interest in making sure that we get underneath and tackle that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Does anybody else want to say any more on that? No? Thank you for that, Paula. So I have now Mark Watkin, then Anthony.
Thank you very much, Terry. Am I going to appear? No, there we go. Yes, thank you very much. And a lot of what I was going to ask has been asked. Just quickly, one of the things I was going to ask is how are we going to measure in a sort of, dare I say, KPI way, the success of what we're trying to pull together here? Do we have clear targets? I know it's very hard and it's a moving situation, but at the end of the day, we hopefully are looking to be able to bring the figures down by a percentage or some sort of measurable. And what is that? And secondly, I'm going to make a plug for Chesbrook, and I know it's been very parochial, but one of the things that Chesbrook has done is actually paid for PCSOs to work in local secondary schools, particularly addressing those children who feel threatened by going to teachers. Fair enough, the PCSOs are seen as non-threatening in that environment, whereas they might be on the high street. I do think that actually one of the problems, and I know you were very generous in the way you referred to them as ESCs, Joe, but there is a variability of approach amongst our ESCs on so many things, and on this one in particular. And it is, to my mind, one of the great weaknesses of our ESC system, that we do not have a kind of model that we can get them all to agree to and apply, and then we would get a standard approach. It's quite clear some ESCs operate in a different way for whatever reason, but it does not get in the way of trying to improve the lot of the children if they don't work together in the same way.
Thanks, Mark. I thought that we had a a model that we were asking for with ESCs across the county, but perhaps we're working on that one. Jo, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, our ESCs, I mean, Mark's right. Of course, you know, there is some variability across our ESCs, and Mark's also right that Chesbrook is a really good one. And there's some great practice there, and there's some great practice in some of our other ESCs. We're working hard at the moment to try, through our relationships with the ESCs and through our regular meetings with them, to try and get, you know, that sort of core offer right for our most vulnerable children and young people. And it's certainly something that me and my team are really pushing on. So that's you know, something we continually develop and continually work on, Terry. And there was another point that Mark made, and I've just
measuring success. How do you measure success?
Oh yes, I knew that. So Jackie will come in as well. What I was going to say is we already have some clear performance indicators within our youth justice system around first time entrance, around reoffending rates, around custodial sentences, much of which is about weapon and knife crime and serious violence. So what we and also in our SASH service, and I'll hand over to Jackie now. And I think what we need to do is pull together some of those indicators that we already report on to begin to reflect back and show you impact. But Jackie, go ahead, because you were going to come in.
I was just going to say it's about measuring outcomes. So I think it's sort of when you put reductions in and everything like that, there's so many outside influences. We've talked about bordering London and young people coming in. So we focus very heavily on what's the difference, the outcomes made to young people. So going back to why young people carry knives is it'll be the percentage of young people that don't carry a knife because they're feeling more safe or they know where to go to get support if they don't do. But there's a whole outcomes framework about the impact of a strategy, Mark.
Okay, so we need to get that reported back here somehow. We'll look at that. Yeah, okay. Thank you. I have now Anthony and then Helen.
Thank you, Teresa. Just sort of one observation. I mean, and maybe this is a statement of the obvious. I mean, that the figures about how many young people actually carry a weapon or something for protection are, you know, really worrying. But I suppose there's also the young people who feel anxious as a result of others doing that sort of thing. And then clearly there's an impact across the whole community of young people if they feel that that there are threats out there. Just the question was about schools and I think Jo used the phrase the tipping point of being excluded, and that broadly speaking, and I realise it's a hugely complex issue. Secondary schools where we are, I think, just below average, but primary schools a fair bit above average. And I just wonder, given that so much we talk about is about patterns of behaviour and early intervention and trying to preempt, I just wonder what work is being done to address that particular phenomena.
Very briefly, Anthony, I mean, we're working with all of our schools, our primary, our secondary, the whole lot, to really sort of build that resilience factor for our children and young people. So everything I described in terms of the toolkit and elsewhere, you know, that is also focused on our young people. And our inclusion team, that, as Jackie said, is working really closely with some of our adolescent services. We've got a team of inclusion workers who work specifically with primary school, and where particularly if they get into year 5, 6 and you're beginning to see some of these problems really begin to bed down, they will reach out and ask for that wraparound support, and they do that. But it's that bit of work, Anthony, that I'm really keen, and Jackie's leading on this with me, to really push forward as we move on now to embed a sort of getting to the root causes, tackling some of the underlying issues. And it's certainly something we'll come back and talk to you about more as we begin to strengthen some of that work.
Okay, thanks. So that's going to come through this panel. It's not going to go through education.
Well, insofar as it's linked into serious violence and the work we're doing with schools to tackle it, Terry, I think it'll come here.
Yeah. Okay.
But obviously, school exclusions also gets reported elsewhere, so it's a bit of a hybrid model.
Yeah, lovely, great. Thank you very much indeed. So I now have Helen.
Thank you, Teresa. Yes, it is a fantastic report, and for somebody new like me, really, really useful to see all the figures. I'm a bit perplexed about something, and I'm possibly missing something. But again, I'm zooming back in on the figures that it was Paula picked them up. I'm a bit confused actually as to whether these are really giving us a clear picture, and I'm a bit worried because what puzzles me is that secondary school, 25%, I'm looking at it again now, 25% of secondary school pupils self-reported that they carry a weapon or something else for protection, but the most commonly reported item was a mobile phone. Those figures immediately jumped out at me because all secondary school pupils carry a mobile phone. I don't know any that don't. And I'm puzzled as to why that was included in the questioning to the children as part of this report, which I see as the health-related behaviour survey. So I'm a bit, I may be missing something, but I'm a bit perplexed by the way the survey appears to have been carried out and what it's actually saying. And also whether we are getting a clear picture of the prevalence of weapons, because if children are including mobile phones, is it higher, is it lower, is there confusion there? So I might be missing something, so if I am, please explain.
Jackie.
Thank you.
It's because they use social media, Helen, so it's probably I know it's not a weapon, and it's probably a bit misconstrued in the survey, is that they'll use the mobile phone to contact the friends, so that, you know, it's about two groups of young people if they're going to have, you know, start something between two different schools or something like that. I agree, it's slightly misleading in terms of a mobile phone isn't necessarily a weapon, but it is that sort of where you know, there's been an incident and it's gone around social media faster than I don't know what. There was one very recent one in Stevenage, and it's sort of it's like an absolute catapult, but yeah, it doesn't probably make quite that much sense. And with regard to other objects, it is things like where they can fashion weapons. So for example, I know it's a pencil sharpener, they'll take the blades out, attach it to a pencil. It's things like that. So where it might not have been an actual knife, is that they might have fashioned something else into it. Even a compass, I know it might not do as much damage as a knife, but there are other things that are considered that as well.
Okay, so how do we get a clear vision about knife carrying then?
Can I just come in there, actually? And it's a really good question, Helen. In the behaviour related survey, people aren't given a list of things that they tick, but a mobile phone provides, say, it's about protection. And so, you know, most young people would say, we also carry a mobile phone in case we're worried. So protection doesn't just mean an aggressive weapon, it actually means something that somebody can do to protect themselves. So so that is a very key point in terms of this question and how young people would have viewed it. So so just adding to what Jackie's saying, it is about how would you protect yourselves, and for the majority of young people, it's actually having a mobile phone.
Okay, so we need to add that sort of into the reporting, or when we reflect what's included. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. I think it was about clarity and what is represented by that figure, and how the children themselves are viewing what they're carrying and why, and what the actual question asked to the children was. I think I just would have expected that figure to be an awful lot higher, actually, if that is how it's viewed by the children. That was the point.
Yeah,
so because I'm not, it's about clarity. Yeah, I
suppose what we're saying is there was no sort of in quotes helpful hints. It was just left to the young person to answer. We can take that back. That behaviour related survey, is that
it doesn't
children's services or is it conservative? Children's services or
Terry.
Public health?
It's public
It's
health.
Public health.
It is public health.
It doesn't go out to every year group.
Yeah,
no, it doesn't. It goes out to certain year groups, and they've just done the one now, so they're analysing it at the moment.
Yeah, so we need to give that feedback to the public health team. But actually, we need to be trying to work closer on these surveys anyway. So I know we're doing that. So, okay, thank you. Fiona.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the report. As others have mentioned, it's hugely informative, and as a new county councillor, I think it's very helpful in setting the scene. I'm particularly interested in the impact of adverse childhood experiences, and particularly about predictors of harmful behaviours. And I just wonder how often we collect the data I suppose, looking at children who have been engaged in, and young people in, knife crime or other risky behaviours, how often do we look back and see how many of those have actually had adverse childhood experiences, and then what do we do with the data?
Do you want me to answer that, Jo? Because that's how we started Families First. Hello, Fiona. When we started Families First, which is the brand for early help, we had some really interesting data in Hertfordshire, which was, I can't remember which university, it was the Birmingham University, that actually pulled together some data around adverse childhood experiences and gave us some percentages, which gave us a really kind of good baseline in sort of working out you know, which sort of probably districts we needed to sort of begin to work with first. And I think as sort of like, you know, it's probably become, children are far more easily able to talk about sort of adverse childhood experiences. We've talked about the range, you know, within schools, our partnerships, etc. There are an absolute lot of touch points where they're able to identify it. I mean, we haven't revisited that data, but I think that actually understanding adverse childhood experiences, which leads to the trauma-informed model, relationship-based practice, you know, managing resilience and risk is embedded in our work, certainly in my services, early help, intensive family support, SASH, and probably within the rest of children's services. I think we do understand a great deal more. I'd like to get to a point where we're doing predictive analytics, so using some of that data. Obviously, pandemic gets in the way, and we were starting to look at how we use some sort of predictive analytics to kind of look at sort of what's the public health term? I can't remember it now. You know, communities, global kinds of stuff, etc., and maybe look at sort of predicting some things in the future.
Yeah, I just think that would be really useful and would help perhaps enable schools as well to do more targeted work with some of their students and young people.
Yeah. So I mean, the ACE model is sort of exemplar around in Hertfordshire, say children's services and public health, again, back in the day when I was in public health. So yeah, there's a lot arising from it, and I think it's been really useful. But as you say, keep moving on, don't we? But I think it's now part of our everyday thinking. We think back to why that could possibly have happened, and then we need to try and stop it. But yeah, absolutely, Fiona, I'm sure it'll come back. Great, thank you. So are there any more questions? No, thank you very much. As ever, an exciting piece of work, and we'll watch it and we'll bring some more information back to panel. So colleagues, the panel is asked to note and comment upon the content of this report and the achievements of children's services and Hertfordshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership in relation to delivery against the assigned priorities. So I think we've done that. So could I just ask you to acknowledge that in the chat function? Excellent. So we've all done that. And there isn't any other business that I've been informed of. So our next meeting is on Wednesday, the 14th of July at 2 p.m. And that will be our day to say thank you to Jenny. OK, so please all do try and attend. I know that we've got coming on the agenda the SEND strategy refresh, but I'm not quite sure what else yet, but it's not very far away. So yeah, it's an opportunity to have a good conversation around SEND, I think, that day. So thank you very much. I hope you've learned a lot today and I'm not too mind blown. But anyway, have a good evening. Probably we've all got other meetings to go to as well. But thanks very much, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye. Bye.